بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه أما بعد. My dear brothers and sisters, today by the blessing of Allah, we will reflect on an important chapter in the Quran, and this chapter is known as Surah Al-Ma'un, the chapter of Al-Ma'un. And this chapter was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ in Mecca. So it's considered to be a Meccan chapter. However, there are few scholars who are of the opinion that it is a Medinian chapter, or another opinion that it is half Meccan and half Medinian. And the reason they say that is because in this chapter, in the second part of the chapter, there is a mention of a hypocritical behavior. الَّذِينَ هُمْ يُرَاءُونَ, those who show off their prayer. And that's a behavior of hypocrisy. And hypocrisy appeared in Medina. There was no hypocrisy or nifaq in the Meccan era. So that is just a clarification on an opinion that exists among the commentators of the Quran, but generally it's understood that this chapter was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ. Now, reading this chapter, we find something very interesting. The chapter correlates spiritual bankruptcy with social bankruptcy. So let's look at the first part of the chapter. The chapter begins with أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ. أَرَأَيْتَ literally means have you seen? But we understand from the context of the Quran, from the different verses, أَرَأَيْتَ, have you seen, does not literally mean to see, but rather it could mean have you heard, have you seen, have you known, have you understood. So here the verse is talking about knowing, about the person who denies the ad-din. And ad-din has been translated in one of two ways. Ad-din to mean judgment, the day of judgment, the day of accountability. Meaning that have you seen the one who denies the day of accountability or denies accountability in the hereafter. And that's consistent with what we find in Surah Al-Fatiha. So Surah Al-Fatiha, the opening chapter of the Quran, we read a verse that says, Maliki Yawmiddin, the master of the day of ad-din, meaning the day of accountability. So accordingly, this group of scholars interpret ad-din here to mean accountability, day of judgment. Another group of scholars would interpret ad-din here to mean the religion or the faith. And this is consistent with another verse we find in the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna ad-deena inda Allahi al-Islam. That deen, faith in Allah, in the sight of Allah, is Islam. Islam, submission. So either interpretation, the essence is the same. You cannot be believer in religion without believing with a day of accountability. And you cannot believe in the day of accountability without believing in the faith itself. So the verse begins then by mentioning the first form of corruption, and that is the spiritual corruption. Spiritual corruption. And right away then, the verse mentions فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يَدُعُّ الْيَتِيمَ وَلَا يَحُضُّ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ. Two traits. The first one is rejecting or abandoning or oppressing or exploiting the yatim. And the yatim is the orphan. So the one who rejects ad-din the one who rejects the deaf accountability, the one who rejects the faith, then this is the one who abandons, oppresses, repulses the yatim, the orphan. وَلَا يَحُضُّ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ, does not encourage feeding the miskin. Now the miskin is a poor person, a person who is in need of help, a person who doesn't have anything. So, and it's interesting that we find the verses saying وَلَا يَحُضُّ, does not encourage. And meaning that if he does not or she does not encourage, it means they will not even on their own initiative go and help the person who's in need. Because when it comes to acts of goodness and virtue, either we are actors or we are encouragers and supporters of those who are at the forefront helping and caring for other people. So here we see then two important correlation. One is spiritual bankruptcy, which is denial of a deen in both interpretation, and then repulsing or oppressing the yatim, the orphan, and not encouraging and not feeding the poor and the needy. A mindset that only believes in their own needs, never care about the weak, never care about the needy. And here the yatim is specifically mentioned because yatim is the weakest segment in society. Does not have parents to take care of them, does not have anyone to stand for them. So being the weakest in society, those who deny the deen, the accountability, those who only think of their own self, they would be abandoning the yatim, they would be oppressing the yatim. So that's the first part of the chapter. Then comes the second part of the chapter, again mentioning another form of spiritual bankruptcy. فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ, wail is a warning, woe to those who pray. But فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ, those who pray, الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ, yet they are negligent of their prayer, they are careless of their prayer. الَّذِينَ هُمْ يُرَاءُونَ, why are they careless? Because they don't do it for the sake of Allah. They don't do it sincerely. Rather, they do it as a show off. They do it as a show off. So this verse is referring to hypocritical behavior. People who don't believe in prayer, people who don't believe in accountability, people who don't believe in the deen, the faith itself, but they pray. They pray because they see some social benefits. And this was something that was evident in the hypocrites in Medina, who found that their tribes, the majority of them became Muslims, and they found it convenient to pretend to be Muslims and to go and pray, but yet their prayer was not sincere prayer. In fact, the scholars mentioned that they were praying when they were in public, but in their private life, they were not praying. So, social bankruptcy associated with another, as a spiritual bankruptcy associated with another bankruptcy, which is وَيَمْنَعُونَ الْمَاعُونَ. Ma'un, some scholars say zakat, some scholars say the small goods. You know how neighbors help each other. Your neighbor asks you for a ladder, asks you for something they're missing. So small kindness, acts of small kindness. Now they do not even offer that, which means if they cannot provide the small, acts of kindness, then by default, then they would not be helping in anything major. So to conclude, my dear brothers and sisters, Surah Al-Ma'un is telling us that spiritual bankruptcy and social bankruptcy go hand in hand. It's also telling us we infer from that spiritual health means social health. The more devout we are, the more caring we should be to the larger society. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.